It is my great pleasure to have as our guest here on the Emory campus and as part of theater program and Theater Emory and the Center for Creativity in the Arts, Playwright José Rivera. I like to refer to José, and I hope he doesn't mind, as a dear friend from many years back. And José writes for theater, for television, for film. Just a little bit of information about him. In 2005, José received an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay for Motorcycle Diaries. This honor made José the first Puerto Rican writer to be nominated for an Academy Award. His screenplay, based on Jack Kerouac's On the Road, premiered at the 2012 Cannes Film Festival and was distributed nationally in the winter of 2013. José's plays include, and some of you will recognize these titles because you've worked on them in acting classes, Another Word for Beauty, Each Day Dies with Sleep, Boleros for the Disenchanted, Sonnets for an Old Century, and references to Salvador Dali make me hot. José has received numerous awards for his playwriting: Fulbright Arts Fellowship, Whiting Foundation, Kennedy Center, National Endowment for the Arts, the National Arts Club, New York Foundation for the Arts, the McKnight Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation. And I wanted to just begin with a little quote that I actually put in the program for the play Marisol. And it's a quote from José, edited a bit. Thoughts about playwriting. Write plays in order to organize despair and chaos, to project an idealized version of the world, to destroy things you hate in the world and in yourself, to remember and to forget, to dance with language, to fight the powers that be, to sound alarms, to achieve transcendence of yourself. So, José, welcome.
Thank you.
And José just visited the playwriting class, and we had an interesting conversation about his process of writing and also how his family background, how he came to become a writer. I've asked him to share that with you as well, and he's graciously accepted to do that. And then I thought we might talk a little bit about the process of writing for theater, for television and for film, what those differences are, what they require. And then we're going to open it up for a very informal question and answer session. So, José, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you. She wasn't exaggerating. We are dear friends from way, way back. Yeah, I was, my parents and grandparents were not literary people at all. They were barely educated. My grandparents, my grandfathers cut sugar cane in fields in Puerto Rico, pineapple plantations. They were illiterate. I have a memory from high school when my grandfather had to sign some documents, and he could only write an X on the document. And I was his witness. I signed my name. And my dad had a high school education, went on to become a taxi driver, a gardener, a cook. My mom had a third grade education, and I told this story in the last class, where my mom grew up. The school only went to the third grade, and for her to go to the fourth grade, she'd have to walk to the next town. And her father, my grandfather, didn't want her to do that. But his real motive was, as he told her, he said, the only reason you want an education is so you can write love letters to your boyfriends. And he wouldn't permit that, as if that was the only reason a girl would want to learn to read and write. And to this day, my mom is 84. She is still mad about this. She's still angry at her father for denying her an education. So when I was 4, we moved from Puerto Rico to Long Island, and I went to public school. And I was very lucky because around the time I was going to public school, there was a huge influx of people moving out to Long Island, and so there was quite a generous tax base, and they were building brand new public schools all over the island. And so I benefited from having gone to some really excellent public schools and had some wonderful teachers. Somewhere along the line, I fell in love with writing very early in life, and just always knew I wanted to do that, even though for many years I didn't know that there was a profession called a writer. I had no idea. And you know how you always want to like be better than your parents? My dad drove a taxi, so I wanted to drive a bus because buses are bigger. And that was like my dream for a while. And eventually I became aware that you could make a living with words, even though it took some time to get there. I wrote a lot of plays, very young. I was telling Jan in the earlier class, I had a crush on a girl and I wrote her a play. A one-woman play that she performed. So you have different motives for writing, that's fine. I just fell in love with it. Fell in love with theater. I love theater. When I was 12, a traveling group of actors came to my elementary school and performed Rumpelstiltskin. And I'd never seen a play before. And suddenly we were in this big auditorium, and we were all doing the same thing at the same time. We were all laughing at the same time. And there was this like great energy between the actors and the audience. And I'd never experienced anything like it. I just totally fell in love with this idea that we were in a communal experience, that we were doing something as a group. We could all have been total strangers, but we were laughing at the same time and silent at the same time and in awe at the same time. And I just found the power of that, the power that those 3 or 4 little actors had on the other side of the room, just amazing. And I wanted to do it. I wanted to do that myself, and I wanted to have that ability to move an audience. So very early I fell in love with performance and with the spoken word. And I wrote a lot of plays, went to college, wrote 4 plays at college. The year I graduated, I met Jan in Cleveland. We were both apprentice actors in the Shakespeare Festival. And, we had different experiences. I vowed never to act again at the end of that summer. And one of the other apprentices, I'm sure you've told them, it was Tom Hanks. And obviously Tom went on to be Tom. And I went on to be not Tom. But we're still friends to this day. In fact, Tom and I are writing a pilot for HBO based on our apprenticeship experiences. So that's been a real sort of gratifying and kind of like, full circle back in the way to the beginnings. After Great Lakes, I didn't get into grad school. I'd applied to Yale and didn't get in. I was so pissed off. I said, fuck those people. And decided no grad school for me. I was just going to go to New York, and I was going to learn on the street. And I went to New York, and I joined writing groups, and I saw everything I could afford, which wasn't a lot. Met older writers, and just sort of tried to learn everything I could from my conversations with them. And I just wrote. I had a 9-to-5 job for a publishing company. I wrote advertising, and I did that for 9 to 5. I'd get on a subway back to my apartment in the Bronx, have a quick dinner, and then write until I passed out, basically. And I did this every day for 4 years. And I wrote a lot of plays, and they were all rejected by everybody. And then in 1983, I had a play that didn't get rejected. It was my first play. It came with a $5,000 check. I had won a contest, and when the check cleared, I immediately quit my 9-to-5 job, and I haven't worked since 1983. So I've been lucky enough to survive as a writer since then, really. I got into television writing very early. I worked on a couple of TV series, some writers love television, and back then it was kind of frowned upon for a playwright to work in TV. That since has changed. Now, all the best writers work for TV, and some of the best shows have all playwright staffs. But I tried it, and it was a good living for a while. But I became disillusioned with it in the early '90s, and I started writing films at that point. And so from that point on, I was writing plays and screenplays, and that took me for many, many years. And from 1992 to 2004, I wrote probably at least one screenplay a year that was not produced. They were never produced for various reasons. I'll give you one little anecdote. I had a meeting with Disney. It's one of my very first meetings. And somehow they sort of knew me as like the magical writer. And so the executive says, and I said to him, what's the idea? He goes, well, this is the idea. We want you to pursue this. He goes, shadows. I'm like, what about them? He goes, you're the writer, come up with something. So I went home, I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do with shadows? And so I came up with an idea, which actually I think I like. The idea is that in the world, we have shadows, obviously, but the mythology of this particular world is that the shadows have their own personalities. They have autonomy, can make decisions. But they're just stuck to us, like, the shadow stuck to me. Except during a full moon, then they can go off and be together. So in this world I was creating, there was a guy and a girl. They worked in the same office, and they were like hopelessly in love with each other, but hopelessly, completely inept about showing that. And what happens is the shadows fall in love, and they contrive to get the humans together. And that's the entire thing. It was like a kind of a magic love story. And I wrote this. Well, first I pitched it, and the executive says, "This is great. We love it. Do that." And so then I wrote a treatment, and the executive was, "I love it. Keep doing that." And then I wrote a first draft, and then I get a phone call from the producer. Goes, "We need to talk." And I'm like, "Oh shit." And the guy said, "Look, it's great. The love story is wonderful. It's funny. It's magical, but we're thinking of going in a different direction." I'm like, "What direction?" He goes, "Well, we don't like the love story anymore." I'm like, "All right, what do you want to do?" He said, "Well, imagine this. Imagine Eddie Murphy is your shadow. And we want you to write a buddy film with a guy whose shadow is Eddie Murphy." And I was so depressed. Honestly, I went home and I told my wife, I said, I don't think I can do this. I just don't know how to write a buddy film for Eddie Murphy. And I quit. I had to leave the project, and I was replaced by another writer. So this happened for 12 years, this kind of thing, like project after project after project in film, for some reason, fell through, producers changed their minds, I'd be replaced. And then in '84, I was hired to write the Motorcycle Diaries, and, for the first time ever, the director said to me, "Oh, we love your screenplay, we're going to make it. We're actually going to make this film." And I was like, "What do you mean, with actors? And a camera?" And he goes, "Yes, we're going to shoot this in South America on location, and you're welcome to come, and, we'll have a great time." And I said, "Great." So that was my first produced film. And, we went to Sundance, we went to Cannes, we had great success critically, and that kind of opened the door to a whole bunch of other possibilities. Halle Berry wanted me to write a film for her company, DreamWorks, all kinds of folks suddenly, the same people who wouldn't give me the time of day, suddenly, they're calling.
Jose said, you're somebody when Halle Berry's on the other end of the phone line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she was great. I don't know if I told you this, but she kissed me once.
Hey.
It was at the Golden Globes. We were literally passing each other, and she goes, "Jose!" and threw her arms around me and gave me a big kiss, and then went on her way. And I think that was the last time I saw her. Because that project died, like so many other projects.
Oh, really?
Yes, that was written. Halle was producer, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the singer who was going to play the lead in it. But the project was written for Sony. Mm-hmm. And this is a typical example of the bullshit of the business. I write this film, and it's about this true story of this woman who's a mixed race girl who was born in the 30s and was born a piano prodigy, and for a while was known as the Black Mozart. and played Carnegie Hall, and it's all true, and it's all in the screenplay. And then when she became an adolescent, people said, oh, wait, you're black, you can't play at Carnegie Hall. And she had played there as a child, but as a young woman, she wasn't allowed to. She hit the color barrier, and her whole life spun out of control. And so I wrote this film for Sony, and then Sony read the script and said, this is great, we love it, but we're not doing dramas anymore. We're only doing comedies and comic books. And so the whole project died, even with Halle Berry behind it. So, it just goes to show what can happen.
Tell them about The Tempest.
Oh, The Tempest.
Yeah, I just think they'd be interested.
Yeah, so The Tempest, The Tempest. Disney and Fox, I think, were teaming up to do an animated version of The Tempest, the film. And I met the producer. I was flown out to Arizona. The producer lived, and and he had done all kinds of Disney films. They're all his stills were all over the walls. And he said, "Well, what's your pitch on The Tempest?" And so I'm telling the story of the film, and I said, "It's Prospero, and he's on an island, and he's a magician." And his brother appears on a ship, and Prospero causes a tempest that causes the ship to shipwreck on the island, and he can get his revenge on his brother. And the producer stops me and says, wait a minute, if Prospero does that, will we like him? And I'm like, oh my God, no. I said, no, we're not going to like him, but we're going to understand him. We're going to sympathize with him. And I said, I don't know. And then he went on and on about how Caliban should be this kind of cute but awkward guy who's in love with Miranda. And I'm like, Caliban wants to rape her. He doesn't want to sing a cute little love song and be soft and cuddly. So anyway, this project completely died, thankfully. But yeah, it's so funny. I've had a terrible history with Disney. There was the Shadow Project. There was this thing, and then I just recently got fired. I was hired to write. To adapt Jack London's White Fang for Disney. And I wrote the script. And this White Fang, the book, which I was adapting, is incredibly bloody. There's a lot of violence, and I didn't shy from it. And their response was like, this is a really great script, but it's just not a Disney. It doesn't feel like a Disney movie. So I was fired and replaced. So.
I think it'd be interesting for students to hear a little bit about your writing process, but also for the three, for theater, TV, and film, and what that has required of you. You mentioned in class today a little bit about learning to write screenplays and the difference, and how you go about writing your plays.
Yeah, for me, plays have always been a matter of instinct more than anything else. I think what's required of a good writer, of a good playwright, is a sensitive ear and a kind of a real sensitivity to the nuances of language as it's spoken, but also what's unspoken. What people don't say is just as important as what they do say. And I think to be a good playwright, you have to be part detective and a really good student of human motivation and psychology, and the way language either illuminates inner character or obscures it. And so I don't know, for whatever reason, I have always had that ability. Even as a kid, when I wrote short stories, they were all like 90% dialogue. They were always about what people said. So I became a playwright really out of a natural inclination, and not even so much a professional choice. It was like, I just knew I could do this. So that's how I started. TV and film are, unlike the theater, which, as we said in class earlier, really comes from a very primitive, primal storytelling impulse. Film and TV are inventions. Film didn't exist really before the 20th century, not very much, and they're artificial. A screenplay is a very artificial piece of work, and so is a movie, and so they come with rules, they come with conventions and paradigms, and they have to be learned, you know. So it took me a long time to learn them, learn the basic rules of film screenwriting, television writing, and after enough time doing it, they became second nature, and I actually began to really enjoy the process. But for me, the process of writing a play is a deeply personal exploration of an obsession, or a dream, or desire, or a fear. Like Marisol, it really is an obsession, an obsessive play about the fear of living in New York, and you know all these things that happened. Whereas a film to me is a kind of more of a formalistic challenge. You know, it's like building a cabinet, you know, or taking apart an engine. There's a certain way to do it. And I love actually the challenge of writing a screenplay, because I love the challenge of, you know, having to work within very strict parameters. Whereas to me, theater is about freedom. And there is, in my opinion, no right and wrong way to write a play. But there are right and wrong ways to write a film. And so it's interesting because now, because I've been doing them both for so long, they satisfy different parts of me. You know, plays satisfy the part that requires me to be incredibly honest and deeply personal. And film satisfies the part of me that loves puzzles and, you know, loves to construct something and loves structure. And, you know, it's like, I don't care what it's about as long as it's elegant and beautiful and tight and strong and it does the work it's supposed to do. So both those things are important to me now, and you know, I'm very lucky, as I said earlier in class, to be able to go from one to the other. And you know, I make a living in film, but I always return to the theater as a place that I love the most. You know, and in television is an interesting thing, because you know, so if we have theater here and we have film here, TV fits perfectly right in the middle. You know, if you watch like an episode of Mad Men, or almost virtually anything, it's like wall-to-wall dialogue. You know, a teleplay pilot is so much like a play. You know, characters sit down and they talk it over. They talk it over. They talk it over a lot like they do on stage. Whereas film, it's all images. It's all about how does the picture tell the story. And how can you tell a story with as few words as possible? But TV and theater don't work that way. They work very similarly, which is why I think playwrights find a lot of success in television as writers, and a lot of good playwrights have crossed over into TV. So that's in a very general sense. Those are the differences.
And also, we'd be interested to hear about how you structure your day for writing. You talk to some of the students.
Yeah. I mean, I work in the mornings. You know, I try to work 4 hours a day, minimal. And, you know, I write longhand. We established that earlier in class. And, you know, being a professional writer takes enormous discipline. And so I'm lucky I have a lot of discipline. And I can sit undistracted and just work on something until my time is over, you know. Whereas, you know, it's so easy to be distracted these days. But I can still find a way to sort of like tune out the world and just continue working. But on the other hand, I love it. So it's like it doesn't feel like work, you know.
It doesn't feel like it. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, it's a real passion of mine, and it's something. When I don't do it is when I feel sick. When I don't write is when I get antsy and frustrated, and you know, it's hard to sit still, and I'm not fun to be around as a human being, and you know. But the writing sort of has a kind of Zen, meditative quality for me.
You mentioned at the post-show conversation last night that I think you said when you wrote Marisol that you got halfway through it, right, and then set it aside for several months and then came back.
Yeah.
Is that typical for you?
No, that was very unusual. Because with Marisol, you know, I got to the point at the end of Act 1 when the angel drops her wings and war is declared, And then I had no idea what to do after that. I did not know the next moment. I was very, very stuck. And I put the play aside for several months, maybe 6 months. And then, as luck would have it, I had applied for a Fulbright grant and got the grant, and then was living in London. And just the atmosphere of London and London theater, and I was working in a theater, was so stimulating that I got my energy back, and then resumed writing the play. But yeah, that's exactly how it went.
Good. I'd like to open this up to questions or thoughts. Yeah, Leslie.
I have a question. Several years ago, I had the great pleasure of getting to direct The Winged Man.
Oh, wow.
For part of the Theater Emory. And I'm struck by the angel in that, and then the angel in Marisol. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about you and angels.
Oh, yeah, there aren't that many others.
No.
I think I spent my angel energy. Yeah, the thing with The Winged Man, that was really about, that was sort of a very disguised meditation on my wife's pregnancy, actually. Because for those who don't know, so this young girl is like exploring a cave for science class. She comes across an angel that's been shot, and he's dying, and she has sex with him, and then he dies, and then she's pregnant with his baby, and everyone thinks she's crazy because she's going, yeah, I met this angel, and they're all like, come on, this is Joey's baby, stop pretending. And it became this thing, this meditation on like how amazing it is to be pregnant. And so that's really, that more than the angels is what connects the plays, in a lot of ways. Because the whole thing with Lenny was like that too,
Right.
Because I was like, I was amazed by watching the changes in her body and what was going on, and I was fascinated. And I wanted to write about it, but I didn't want to I just wanted to write a metaphor for it. I didn't want to write about it because I felt like, what do I know as a man,
Right.
But as an artist, I can create a metaphor to at least help me understand, So that was why I wrote that play. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Salvador Dali? Because we've had some Ozzy right now is playing the role of Benito in an acting class. And we've had, you met Mike today, who also had played that role in another class. How did that play come about? There's the character of the moon and the coyote.
Right,
What were you
yeah.
thinking?
Has everyone read the play or no?
I don't think so. A few may know this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a play about a soldier who comes back from the first Persian Gulf War and is dealing with his wife, who is unhappy about some of the things he did during the war. That's sort of the realistic center of the play, and then on the edges of the play are this kind of these surreal scenes with a cat and a coyote and the moon and this woman. And the sort of nuts and bolts of it for me. So in the play begins with a cat and a coyote. And the cat is domestic and the coyote's wild. And the coyote's like, come on, let's go to the desert, I'll fuck you and it'll be great. And the cat's like, no, you're gonna eat me, I'm happy here, I don't need to be wild. And the coyote's saying, yeah, you need to be wild, you're too domestic, And so it becomes this sort of like tug of war, almost like, and it was always meant to be sort of in microcosm, the story of the marriage itself, But the way it started was I was walking through LA with my son, who was pretty small at the time, and we walked past a Volkswagen, and we heard a cat meowing. And my son goes to the Volkswagen, and on the tire, between the tire and the fender, was a kitten. And he goes, Dad, can we take the cat home? And I'm thinking, oh, fuck, I don't want to. I'm allergic to cats. But he seemed so earnest. And I said, okay, but you take care of it. If you can take care of the cat, it's yours. And he said, yes. So we take the cat home, grows, it gets bigger. It climbs all over everything, so he names the cat Climber. And I don't know if you guys know about the Santa Ana winds in
Yeah.
California. So when the Santa Ana winds start blowing, and we had a fence in the backyard. The fence gets knocked down. A few nights later, we hear coyotes howling in the backyard, really close to the house. And then we notice that the cat's missing. And like my wife and I are in the backyard and looking for the cat, and the cat had a collar, and we find the collar and some blood and some hair, and we thought, oh no, we can't tell my son. And so that became the beginning of my trying to imagine what the cat's last moments were like, and like if the cat could talk and the coyote could talk, what would they say? And so that became the first scene of the play. You know, it sort of started that way. And, you know, and I was deeply influenced by Lorca at the time, and in Blood Wedding, how the moon is a character that speaks, and I wanted to do the same thing. So in my play, the moon is a character that speaks, and the moon wants to sleep with Gabriella, the main woman, and you know, so all these elements felt like fun to me. They felt like, I'm just going to do it. I don't care if it makes any sense. I want to have some fun. I want it to be theatrical. And because the heart of the play was very dark, you know, it was about war and what your responsibilities are in war and what you do in a war and that kind of thing. And so that's really how I constructed the play.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, Josh.
You were speaking earlier about how your writing process, you typically try to do about 4 hours a day. On the days where you find it very difficult to find that sort of inspiration or it doesn't necessarily strike, do you have sort of like go-to topics that you feel you could more readily write about or that you can bring new insight to more easily?
Yeah, I tend, if I'm blocked on something, I don't try to write. Like if I sit down and it's just not coming, and I'm just looking at a piece of paper, then I don't even try. And when I teach writing, I always tell my students that. I said, walk away, because you don't want to associate your desk with torture. You know, it's sort of like having insomnia. They say, get out of bed. Don't turn your bed into a horrible place. And I think that way about the writing desk too. Like I say, walk away, do something else. You know, play basketball, wash the dishes, go to a movie, because eventually it'll come back. You know, so much of writing is subconscious, and you may be stuck in your conscious mind, but your subconscious is still working it out. And you'll be so surprised. Take some time off, go back, and it'll be there. You know, it's kind of miraculous. We were talking about this earlier. I find exercise like the best way to get my stuff going again. You know, so yeah, I definitely, you know, I think writer's block is a writer's best friend, actually, because what's really happening is that some part of your mind is refusing to let you go on with something that isn't good. Somewhere along the line, you've lied in your writing, and some part of your mind won't let you continue, and that's when you get blocked. And I find this to be true time and time again. You know, once I sit down, I'll go back to what I've written, and I find the moment that isn't really true. You know, and once I fix that, then boom, it all starts to flow again. So listen to your writer's block. It's your best friend.
Yes. Hey, Roz.
Hi. During the Marisol production process, we spoke a lot about when you write for the theater, all of the problems that you have to solve during the production process. You know, during Marisol, the wings have to disintegrate and somebody is caught on fire and all of those things. And I'm curious, when you write for theater, how drawn you are to creating those problems, and if that translates when you write for film. Because in film, you can more easily make those things happen. You can make anything happen, really, in film quite easily. So do you tend to back off of those in film? I'm just curious about the play of the two.
Yeah. I mean, I like spectacle in plays, so I'm always trying to find ways to make the visual experience as exciting as possible. Hence those kinds of moments, you know, in Marisol, and like, in references to Salvador Dali, there's a scene where Gabriel tango dances with the moon, and it's supposed to be very visual and sensual and stuff. So yeah, I like to push that, and I try not to worry about whether you can do it. Like, it's not my problem. It's not. It's the director's problem. It's the designer's problem.
Yeah.
And they like a challenge, I know that I think Rutgers in the graduate program, one of the assignments is to design Marisol. So yeah, I mean, I like a good challenge, and I like to pose a good challenge to people who want to go there. And for film, see, the thing with film, in my career, and it's different for other people, of course, I only write film to be paid. Like, I don't write film to explore my psyche. I don't write films to discuss my childhood. I only write movies when somebody offers me a job. So what that means is, because of Motorcycle Diaries and other things, I've been known as the guy who can adapt books into film. So I'm constantly being given books to adapt. So those pose completely different challenges. And I can't indulge my sense of whimsy or spectacle as much in film, because that's not what my job is. My job is to take a piece of literature that's written to be a private moment between the reader and the work, and to turn it into a public event known as cinema. And that's my job. And in that, I could probably find space and time to do visual, beautiful things. But that's not my primary objective. My primary objective is to tell a story in film. So I've done a ton of adaptations. I adapted, I don't know if you guys know Junot Diaz, Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. I adapted that, and White Fang, as I said earlier, and On the Road, and a bunch of books. It's as I said, my dad was a taxi driver and a cook and a gardener. He worked really hard, and so I just learned a kind of working class relationship to labor. And I think of myself as a worker. I think of myself as a worker with words, and I approach it like a 9-to-5 job. I don't romanticize it. I'm very clear about, how much I should be paid, and I'm rigorous, and I work really hard. So for me, that's what film is about. It's a job I really like, but it's a job. It's definitely a job, and television as well. So I don't permit myself the creative latitude that I would in a play when I write a film. Yes.
Yes?
I know you spoke very briefly about that you had acted before and you were at the Shakespeare residency. But I was wondering how your experiences as an actor, negative or positive, have informed the way that you write for the stage.
Yeah, that's a great question. We touched on this in the earlier class that, when I was in college, I didn't take writing classes. I've never taken a playwriting class. And as I said, I didn't go to grad school. But what I learned about writing, I learned by being an actor. And so, all the questions you ask about acting are the same question you ask about writing. What is my motivation? What am I in the scene to do? What do I want out of this moment? What is my obstacle? What am I willing to do to get what I want? Those are all the same character questions you would ask when you're preparing a role as you would as you're preparing to write a play. And so I found being an actor to be tremendous training, and as I said earlier, I really sort of understood political theater by performing in Brecht. I really understood the nature of naturalism by being in Chekhov. I was blown away by the poetry in Shakespeare. So all these were my teachers in a way. And so that was the great benefit for me as an actor. When Jan and I met in Cleveland in '77, we were both apprentice actors, and almost all the apprentices were very kind of idealistic and willing to do anything, and worked really hard, and we all had big dreams. The equity company of professionals was a different story altogether, and I found them, with many exceptions, but I found them to be very cynical and burnt out, and I thought to myself, oh my God, I just don't want to be that. I don't want to turn into that bitter person. So, and I also had, like any young actor, severe doubts about my own abilities and what am I doing? And I had loved writing so much, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go with the thing I love. And I love writing, and I liked acting, but I didn't love acting, and to me that was the difference. And I probably could have tried to do both, but at that time I just thought, you know what, I don't want to be a half-ass writer and a half-ass actor. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to be all in on it, And so to me, I put all my chips on writing.
Other questions? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about what kind of role research has in any of the work that you do, both as a screenwriter and as a playwright?
Yeah, it's far more important in my film writing, because I tend to write plays about things I already know deeply about on some level or connected to. But so for film, I've had to research the Conquest of the Aztecs by Hernan Cortez. I wrote a film about a woman who had been abducted by leftist rebels in Colombia. So I do all this research on the Colombian Civil War and the FARC and all this stuff. When I was writing On the Road, I researched heavily the Beat period, the generation of Ginsberg and William Burroughs. For the Motorcycle Diaries, I had to find out everything I could learn about Che Guevara and Castro and the revolution and all those things. So, research has been a huge, huge part of it for me. I was once hired by DreamWorks to write a film called The State Boys Rebellion. And what that is that in the 40s, I don't know if you've ever heard of the eugenics movement, but in the 40s, there was a concentrated effort to weed out, inferior people from our society with low IQs or disabilities or whatever. And they were put into things called state schools. And state schools, some were horrible. Kids were sterilized, they were used as slave labor, they were sexually abused. And there had been a young man who was of normal intelligence, but he was moody and depressive and an orphan. And because of that, they put him in a state school. And later, as a grown-up, wrote a book about it called The State Boys Rebellion. And I was hired to write that story. And one of the things that they did to the State Boys was they were experimented upon. There was an agreement between Quaker Oats and the U.S. Army where they were taking radioactive oatmeal and feeding it to these boys to see what would happen. Quaker Oats was totally in on it, and they agreed to do it. And the kids were told, oh, you're doing science. And all you have to do is eat this oatmeal, and when you go to the bathroom, write down what time you went. And the boys were like, oh boy, we're doing science, And it turned out Freddie, the guy who wrote the book, eventually learned through the Freedom of Information Act that they were being fed radioactivity.
So this is pre or post Lenny?
Oh, this was post Lenny. I'd already written Lenny.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, Lenny was in the past.
Prescient.
Yeah, I wrote Lenny. I wrote Marisol first draft in '89. So this was much, much more recently. And so, I met Freddie. In my research, I read everything I could about the eugenics movement. I met him, and I heard his story. And this is just a long-winded way of saying, yes, I do research. Yeah.
It sounds like you like it, too.
Yeah, no, I do. I've learned so much. I've learned so many different things. I wrote a film about the Chilean miners. the 33 miners that were trapped. And so I went several times to Chile. I met the miners. I went into the mine itself, which is really terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you go in with your helmets, the helmets have lights. So I went in with the miners, and there was like 5 or 6 of us. And the head miner said, okay, turn off your lights. And we all turned off our lights. And he said, okay, we're just going to sit in the darkness for 1 minute. And he said, imagine if you were here all the time. And it was absolutely terrifying. It was the darkest dark you can imagine, and cold. So anyway, but I met the miners as well. So yes, I've had, it's one of the blessings of this profession, that it's taken me all over the world, and I've met amazing people. I've had great conversations. I wrote a film about the Armenian genocide. I traveled to Armenia, I traveled to Turkey. It's been the best education I could ever want, really.
In terms of your projects, do you like to multitask, or do you stick to one project at a time? What kind of timetable do you typically have?
Yeah, it's impossible for me to work on one thing at a time, just because things are so unpredictable. So for instance, I could be writing a play, and the phone will ring, it'll be my manager, and he'll say, oh, so-and-so wants you to write a movie. And 9 times out of 10, I say yes. So even though I intended only to write my play, suddenly I'm writing my play and a movie. And then the phone will ring, and someone will say, my manager will say, that screenplay you wrote 2 years ago, they want you to do a second draft now. So now I've got 3 things on my plate, And this happens constantly. I'm used to it now, and I don't mind it as much. The way I see screenwriting is it's a little bit like being a professional athlete, professional baseball player, meaning sometime along the way you're going to get injured. You're going to be too old to play. You're going to be in a slump, and your career will end. And I see screenwriting that way, which is somewhere along the line, something's going to happen, the work's going to dry up, you're going to be passé, your last film is going to be a bomb, something's going to happen, and the work will dry up. This is my theory. And so as long as the work is not drying up, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to ride the wave as long as it's still there. So yes, I do multitask a lot. What I tend to do is I like to work in chunks of a week. So like 1 week, I'll say to myself, I'm only going to work on my play this week. But then I have to put it down, and I said, now I'm working on my pilot this week. And I put that down, now I'm going to work on my screenplay this week. And it's just a matter of for me, it's like, who's the most angry with me at any one time? That's the one that gets my attention.
Anybody else? I had a couple of things I wanted to mention. So how many of you in the room, maybe there was a couple of you were at the play last night and saw the post-show conversation. So what was a surprise to many of us is how autobiographical Marisol is. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought you could share with some of our designers and our managing director here a little bit about some of the incidents in Marisol and how
that
came to
really
be.
happened. Yeah. So one time I was visiting my sister in Ohio, and I got back to New York to the Port Authority, and I took the subway back from there to the Bronx, and it was about 1 a.m. or something like that, and I was the only person in the car, and I was reading the newspaper, and a guy came in with a golf club and started banging on the windows, and then he noticed me there and started swinging at me, and all I had was my newspaper to defend myself. And I thought, wow, this is a really absurd way to die. Thankfully he was so screwed up on drugs that, he never hit me. And so, that was one of the incidences, Another one was, I was walking through the West Village with my girlfriend, and we were crossing the street, and a car almost hit us. It cut us off really closely. And she, being very hot-tempered, kicked the side of the car, and the car stopped, and the doors fly open, and 3 guys come out, and one of them's carrying a tire iron, and the other one's carrying an ice cream cone. And lucky for me, it was the guy with the ice cream cone that attacked me. And so that's the scene in the thing.
Right.
Also, and I said this to the actor last night, who played the ice cream cone man, that guy that he is playing is a real person. So if you watch the film The Taxi Driver, you'll see a scene on the street corner, this little man in a checkered thing playing the drums. And he's got this sort of rap, I forget what he's rapping about, but he's playing the drums and he's incredibly good. He tosses his things in the air, catches it, and plays. And Scorsese caught that moment, you know. And then this guy, who was just an anonymous kind of homeless man, finds out he's in Taxi Driver. And now his whole rap became, I'm in Taxi Driver, and I never got paid, and he used me, you know. And I saw him on the street corner, you know. I saw that man. He was kind of infamous. He used to play around Carnegie Hall. And I'm sure he's been dead many years at this point. But those are some of the things in the play that are real.
Tomorrow, we're going to do a reading of another of Jose's play called The Last Book of Homer. And so I just wanted to know a little about that and maybe let them know about the script and how many times it's been read to this point, etc.
Yeah. I hope you guys come. It's a pretty new play.
It's at 4 o'clock tomorrow.
Yeah. So what happened was I have 4 brothers, and they're all former military guys. So 2 of my brothers were Marines, and 2 of them were in the Army. And when I got married the second time, my brothers were at the wedding, at the reception. They got really drunk, and they came up to my wife and I, and they said, if you guys are ever in any trouble, anywhere in the world, call us, and we'll take care of it. We'll be there in 10 hours or less. And I'm thinking, okay, sure, you guys are really drunk. And so that was the promise they made in 2005. And then a few years later, I was on the phone with one of my brothers, and he asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I've just written this pilot. It's set in Mexico, and if all goes well, by this time next year, we'll be shooting in Mexico. And then I just casually said, but with my luck, I'll get kidnapped by a drug cartel. And without missing a beat, my brother says, oh, don't worry. Remember the promise? We'll get you. And so that's the play. So in the play, my character, which is lovingly referred to as Numbnuts, has been shooting a movie in Mexico, has been kidnapped by a Mexican drug cartel. My 4, 50-year-old, overweight, PTSD'd, half-deaf, limping brothers go to Mexico, buy a shit ton of guns, and try to stage a rescue with the drug cartel. So that's the play. It all takes place in a motel, and the compound where Numbnuts is being held is right across the street.
Yeah.
Has your family seen this yet?
No one has seen it really because it hasn't been produced, but we have had many readings, and they haven't been to any of them. They've read the play. So of my 4 brothers, predictably, the one I knew would read the play actually has read the play, and he really, really liked it. He had one note for me. At one point, I referenced the name of a tank, and I got the tank wrong. So he told me the real name. The other 3 is, my brother Hector, who's the youngest brother, his character in the thing really goes through a huge journey, and I was very nervous because I revealed certain embarrassing things about Hector in the play. So I didn't give it to Hector, I gave it to his wife, and her name is Leisha, and I said, if you think Hector can handle this, we'll give it to him, but if you don't think he can, I won't give it to him. And she read it, and she said, oh yeah, he'll be fine. He said, it's a little embarrassing, but ultimately his character is the most redeemed of all the brothers. But I know that when the play does get produced, they'll all come. And my sister's mad because she's not in the play.
So that will be at 4 o'clock tomorrow. We're thinking in Rich 205. It will be in the Rich building. If the room changes, we'll just put a sign out there, but it starts at 4 tomorrow. So we'd love to have you come hear it if you're available. Jose, we thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. And if you have any other questions, feel free to come on up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.